Great. Good to see you here. I think it's going to be a lot of fun tonight. Couple details I want to get through. I want to reintroduce our readers because some people don't recognize them. Michelle, stand up. This is Michelle Konstantinovsky. And who's got and Allie Slagle next to her. And this is where you'll find them if you have a paper to drop off. And if you have one to pick up, they will leave them on this table, right? There? Oh, okay. They're going to put them at the bottom of the stairs at the end of the class. So you can pick up your reading responses then, okay? Nikki Henderson will be doing a discussion section tomorrow, Barrows 166 at 6 o'clock. I strongly encourage you to come. There's a lot of food for thought tonight, and it should be a good discussion. Readings for next week. Next week, we're going to move on to policy, and we're going to have a discussion of the Farm Bill with one of the principals involved, Congresswoman Shelley Pingree, and two people who lobby for change in the Farm Bill. Ken Cook at Environmental Working Group, and Dan Imhoff, who's written a very good book on the Farm Bill, Citizen's Guide to the Farm Bill. There are some readings online, so please check those out. From Cook and Imhoff, I don't think Shelley has given us a reading, but I think you've got enough there. Attendance. Okay, you got your clickers? You're not supposed to have one. Okay, we're going to do this a little differently. You've got 5 options, A, B, C, D, and E. Before I introduce Paul Rozin, I want to say a few words about last week's presentation, because we did not have time to kind of digest it together, ask questions of our guest. But answer me this question. Your prevailing feeling after, would you describe it as, and get these letters right, I'll read it twice. A, exhilarated. B, filled with guilt and shame. C, angry. D, motivated. E, perplexed. Okay, I'll go through that again quickly, and then you can make your choice. I realize you may have mixed emotions. You got to pick the first one that comes to mind. Exhilarated, A. Guilty, B. Or shameful. Angry, C. Motivated, D. And perplexed is E. Okay, so if you'll make your votes, we'll know if you're here. And then, Allie, maybe you could tell me in a minute or two how it comes out. I chose these words because these are the reactions I've heard from those of you I've had a chance to speak with. And I share your complicated feelings about this. I had moments of thinking, I thought it was a very exciting presentation. I had moments of thinking, wait, it's not that simple. Eating alone is not sinful. And I'm not sure science is over or the Industrial Revolution is over. Peter speaks in primary colors, very strong primary colors. And I did have, at moments, feelings of guilt or shame about, not thinking every moment of my life about how I am implicated down to the elastic in my underwear, in the social and economic crimes of my time. But I was happy to be reminded of it. And I think that it's important to remember that what you had an example of is not just his analysis, but he's a great storyteller. And he was telling a story of our implication in things, how everything is connected. And to the extent that one of the themes of this class is storytelling, that's something I think very useful to consider. We're encouraged to think of products as just objects, as things. And Peter's message, one of his messages, and this applied to both clothing, which he talked about a lot, and tables and food, is that these things are not just things, they're relationships. And that what you choose to eat connects you to the world in very complex ways. Connects you to the soil and the species that live there, connects you to the species you're eating, connects you to all the people who brought that food out of the soil and to your plate. And these are things we don't think about very often. But interesting things follow when we begin to think about them. Stories emerge, and very often changes in behavior. And so if there's any one word I would take away from that whole presentation, it is implication, how we are implicated in systems, in whatever we do. What you do with that, there are many different things you can do with that. For me, a lot of it has involved telling stories of implication in my writing. But it also leads to certain political actions, I think, for some people, and to an expansion of empathy and concern. So I think there's something very exciting about thinking about those connections, as troubling as it is. Now, turning our attention to today's guest, you know, a lot of what Peter was getting at was choices. How do you make choices about food, about clothing, about your work? Well, our guest today is an expert on food choices, but he comes at them from a very different perspective, the perspective of psychology and of social science. Paul Rozin is a professor of psychology at Penn and the author of what, in my view, is some of the most provocative writing on the psychology of food ever written. He studies things like the emotion of disgust. He studies our subconscious attitudes toward food, how culture shapes those attitudes, and how different those attitudes are from one culture to another. Why, when you show a French person a picture of a slice of chocolate cake and ask for their first association, they'll say birthday or celebration. And you show that same picture to an American and they say calories or guilt. What is that about? Well, Paul's work is about plumbing that mystery, getting to the bottom of those differences. And he does it with imagination, with humor, and with brilliance. He's had a profound influence on my thinking. The phrase, the omnivore's dilemma, comes from him. I first read it in his work and came to understand it in his work. And so he's had a big influence on me, and I think if you attend to him, he will have a big influence on you. Please welcome Paul Rozin.
It's on. Come on.
You got it?
Thank you, Michael. Excuse me a moment. It's about food, so I have food with me. Okay. Berkeley is a special place for me, presumably for you, and I sort of feel I have to justify myself here. So first of all, let me say that giving a talk to a group like this has made me think more about where food comes from, which is not what I normally think a lot about. And it's been a good thing for me. And earlier this summer, I had a chance to talk to the 500 great chefs of the world in Copenhagen. And that was also a talk that made me think seriously about what should I say to them? And I'm going to end up telling you a little summary of what I said to them. So usually when I give a talk, I figure out on the plane on the way out what I'm going to do. But this one made me think, and the other one did too. So let me just give you a little bit of why should you listen to me? Well, first of all, I'm an eater. That doesn't distinguish me from any of the rest of you. My wife wrote 4 cookbooks. My son is a molecular gastronomer who got his degree, by the way, at Berkeley in astrophysics, which is not what he does now. I'm a liberal Democrat. I'm for peace. I taught summer school here once and loved it and wanted to stay. Now, I want to establish my credentials a little more concretely, so let me tell you that I lived out in the suburbs of Philadelphia until a year ago, and I lived in a town called Media, Pennsylvania. This is the town that has a little trolley car that runs down the main street, and it's a real town. I love this town. I still go there, even though I've not lived there for years. I go there for haircuts. I go there for my drugstore. I go there to my bank. Here's my bank. And Brendan is my banker, and I know him well, and I know a little about his family. He knows a little about my family. And when I go to the bank, I talk to Brendan. That's awfully nice. This is about, I'm trying to establish my credentials as being someone who should care about local food, okay, in case you don't understand this. We have a 5 and 10 cent store. Media is an 8-block long main street. And here is my drugstore, which is run by Marty. And when I need some extra something because I'm going away for an extra week and my prescription has run out, he says, okay, we'll take care of it. Hope nobody's taking notes on this. And my home, which is not in the town, but around the town, is on 2.5 acres of land. And this is the backyard. There's a stream in the backyard. So I like nature, too. And that makes me belong here. And I'm telling you this because I'm going to say some things that you may not like about nature a little later in this course, in this class. But what's important to me about media is the communitas. There is a sense that you know the people you're dealing with. I know these people. I say hello to them. They know my dogs. And this is important to me. And this connection that I feel living in the modern world is quite severe when I try to call somebody up and I get 7 alternatives, none of which are the one I want anyway. And I eventually have to hit the final one. And I find this, most of you have grown up in this room, in such a world. I actually grew up in a world in which even if I wanted to call General Motors, I'd actually get a person who answered the phone and would say, General Motors, what can I do for you? And I would say, I would like your marketing department. They say, okay, just a moment. Imagine that. Okay. Now, one of the things that I want to convince you of today is that nobody has a monopoly on knowledge. And one of the things that we should be doing as people, as in my case psychologists, as food-interested people, is learning from people who have something to teach us. And one set of entity that we can learn from is a culture. Some cultures do some things well and other things not so well. For example, if we have time, I'll explain to you why the French do food better than we do, and they certainly do universities worse than we do. I mean, the universities are terrible. I can't even figure out how they work, nor can they. Now, I want to start with a problem, the biggest problem, in a way, that the food issue faces, which is not a food problem. It's that there are too many people in the world. And that's one of the reasons that we have food problems, because we're trying to get all this food out of an earth that has only so much capacity. So this is the world population, and that red line is the population, and you can see in the last few hundred years, it's just shot way up. Extraordinary rise. And the death rate is going down as more people are reproducing, and these are the death rates in 4 countries over the last 250 years. And that's a big problem, because if we could solve that problem, some of the food problems would go away. And the answer is, there are 2 solutions that have worked to that problem. One is get rich. Rich countries are not reproducing very much these days, like Western Europe, United States. So that's one way, but that's sort of hard to produce richness in a country. Every country wants to be rich. And the other is China. China has actually done something about growth rates. They've prohibited having more than 1 child. Now, that's pretty extreme, but I'm just saying that this is a really big problem, and we should be worried about it. If we're interested in food, we should be worried about the fact that there are too many people. Now, something good has happened in the world. There's a lot of sense that there's something, I've already talked about, something bad has been happening in the world, becoming impersonal, becoming digitalized, all these bad things. But I want to remind you of one very important fact. The average life expectancy in the United States in 1900 was 49 years. It is now 79 years. That's a lot of life improvement, and that is because, to a large degree, of the very things that we're not happy about. So it's a complicated story. It's sanitation, it's antibiotics, it's a lot of things. It's money. None of them I'm particularly fond of. I'm not fond of even sanitation, certainly not fond of money. But these are things that have made a difference. So let's just recognize that we've made a lot of progress, and a lot of the world hasn't made that progress much yet. Only 80 to 85% of the world is not the developed world. The developed world is 15 to 20% of the world. So that most of human beings are not in the situation that we are in, with the kind of medical care we can get, the kind of sanitation we have, and so on. Just for a starter, 60% of the people in the world live in Asia. we use that term Asians, like, or Asian Americans, that's like most of humanity. Poor people in the world spend close to 50% of their income on food. We spend less than 10% here in the United States. So food looms as a sort of necessity from day to day, from week to week for most people in the world. So I want to start out with the idea then that and I'm borrowing this from the world's greatest chef, Ferran Adria of El Bulli. He gave a talk in July. This is the food of the world, he started out with. He said it in Spanish. This is the food of the world. And he said he started out with the idea that, well, okay, so this is the Asians, and this is the rest of us. Some of the best food in the world comes from here, as we all know. Chinese food, Indian food, all sorts of food. And I'm not going to talk much about these guys, though I'm very interested in Asia, and I do some work in India. Just to give you one quick one, this is, I meant to redo this figure. This is what's called the Z-score, which is not obvious to what that means, most of you. But what this is saying is that in the answer to eating as a religious experience, my diet must adhere to strict moral religious principles. People in India are much more likely to say that, much, much more likely than Americans. A majority of the Indian sample, this is an internet sample, say yes, and a majority of Americans say no, okay? So that's my just token point that food means very different things to people in this part of the world. And I'm now going to discard this half of the grapes because I'm not going to talk about them anymore, but I wanted to at least mention the importance of it. Okay, now we have our own problems with food, as you know, because we have in our country, unfortunately, a moderate percent of people who do not live in a world where they can eat whatever they feel like, where they can buy whatever they feel like, and who are not even more poorly educated than most of us in this room about what they might best be eating. And of course, those are the people who live largely in the inner cities of the country. And my student Jared Stein, who's sitting right here visiting with me, works there. He's visiting equivalent things here, and he is trying to teach nutrition to inner city children, nutrition and cuisine. And one of the things he discovered is that though they know the food pyramid that they know is a very different one from the food pyramid that you see from the government. And here is one of his students. He had his students draw food pyramids, and this is the pyramid of what they actually eat. Okay, and they were much more engaged by writing this pyramid, I assure you, than on writing the pyramid that has, grains and all that at the bottom and meat at the top. So this is a good pyramid because it really tells us a lot. And Jared's going to get a whole bunch more of these because the students really enjoy doing this. Okay, so we live in this crazy world. When I say we now, I mean maybe 80% of Americans. In this developed world, crazy world where we have a surplus of food, there's plenty of food, it's relatively cheap compared to our income, there's an enormous variety. We have superfoods, some things that never existed in nature, like chocolate, that are much more tempting than anything you'll find on a tree, if I may say that. I mean, I think chocolate is really pretty special. We don't have to do it. We used to have to work to get food. We don't have to work anymore. A click of a mouse will bring it, so we don't have to spend any energy. We've had the epidemiological revolution, so we don't tend to die of infectious disease like many of the rest of the people in the world. We die from degenerative diseases, so the effect of food on us is not obvious, because if a food is increasing the calcification of your arteries, that's going to take decades to show up in your health. So we're in a peculiar world, and we evolved not to be in this world, but to be in the world where food was in short supply and we had to work to get it. So we are ill-equipped for this world because we evolved in a different place. Now, just very quickly, this is a really quick 1-minute course in food choice. The main thing that determines people's food choice, once you take cost and availability out of the way, that's very important. You only can eat what's available, right? You may love lobster, but if there isn't around, you ain't eating it tonight. Okay, taste. The big one. People eat what they like, what they enjoy the experience of. Mostly it's taste and smell, but it's other things too. The second most important thing is convenience. People eat what's easy to eat. And the third thing is considerably less important for most people is health concerns, though they state them all the time. They don't actually let them determine what they eat. And then there are other things like moral concerns, like eating food that comes from a place that you don't like or comes from a place that doesn't treat people well. You might want to know, what makes us like a food? And the answer is, we don't know. We really don't know. We have an innate preference for certain tastes like sweet and probably fatness, but we don't know why you like broccoli and you don't. We just don't know. And it doesn't run in families. This is never mind the numbers here. What this is saying is that for food and music preferences, your parents' preferences have very little to do with yours. We're talking about adults, not the little kids. Adults, college students, and their parents have a very low correlation. If you like broccoli, it doesn't say much about whether your parents like broccoli. If you like sushi, well, actually, sushi it turns out to be an exception, so that was a bad example. But if you like beets, you don't know if they like beets. Values run more in families. Things like attitudes to abortion, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. Now, I want to discuss very briefly a couple of things about food and health, because food and health is a great concern. There's no question that food is related to health. And we are, as a culture, extraordinarily concerned with that link. Though we don't always follow the dictates that it might predict, we are certainly worried about it. So I just want to say a few things to you about this, because they're things that most intelligent Americans do not know. And one of them, which is right here in this lovely biochemical slide here, is that you think, in fact, let me ask you a question. You've got clickers here. Do you have to have any carbohydrates in your diet? Yes or no? Well, say yes, oh, is that number one?
Yeah, do it on your clicker.
Yeah, one is yes, two is no. Is that what you're doing? A, B. A is yes, B is no. Okay, what's the answer? We got an answer?
83% yes.
Okay, the answer is no. You can make all the carbohydrates you need internally from fats and amino acids. Okay? I mean, normally you don't do that, but you can. The metabolic pathway is there. How about fat? Do you need any fat at all in your diet? Well, can you make fats? Yes, you need fat. No, you don't need fat. That's okay. We have the same 83% saying yes here, but this time it's right, because there are essential fatty acids. Most of the fat in you can be made internally, but there are some important kinds of fat that you have to eat. I won't ask you for protein. You all know you need protein. But here's the important point. The point is that you think that the percent of carbohydrate, the percent fat, and the percent protein you eat is like a fixed amount. That's only the amount that comes in. There's a lot of exchange inside the body. If you don't have enough amino acids, you can't make them all, but you can make some of them. And you can make the basic, most of the fatty acids and glycerol from sugar. So basically, it's not like your diet is determining completely your macronutrients. There are other things that determine how much you have of this enzyme, how active it is, and so on. So that's point one. Second point, this is a plot here of each of those points is a country. Okay? A country. It tells you, so the life expectancy average is on the vertical axis, and the horizontal axis is the percent of fat in the diet. You'll notice that that curve slopes upward. The correlation is 0.64, quite a high correlation, between the percent of fat in your diet and how long you live. Now, this is based on 126 countries off the World Health Organization website. I assembled this material myself. Now, that should make you think, just for a moment, hey, fat's supposed to be bad, but the more fat people are eating, the longer they're living. Well, there's a lot of reasons for that, including that wealthier countries have more fat in their diet. They also have better health care and so on. But this is still sobering to just think about this. You wouldn't have predicted this. By the way, the correlation is also positive between cigarettes per capita and how long you live, because countries like Nigeria don't have enough money to smoke. So a lot of the poorest countries in the world can't afford the luxury of tobacco. Okay. Third one, life expectancy. This is world life expectancy from 2008 to 2010. Longest lived country is Japan. The next 82-year-old life expectancy is a tie between Australia, Israel, Italy, Singapore, Spain, and Switzerland. I left out countries with less than 3 million people. There are a number of them that are up there with them. Now, I want to just notice something there. Notice that Switzerland, Spain, and Australia, 3 of those 6, eat what we would call an unhealthy diet. A lot of meat, a lot of fat. So this simply says you can live a long time and eat that stuff. It doesn't mean you wouldn't live longer if you didn't do it, but a good long life is compatible with that. Notice that we're 19.5 on this life expectancy. We're not doing all that well. Okay. Now, we have a problem in understanding our own food world because we are not taught nutrition. Nutrition is not part of the American education, by the way, other Western European education system either. It's really remarkable that food is so important, that health is so important, and we don't teach nutrition. Furthermore, we don't teach probability. Well, in order to establish risk, all the information about whether this is good for you or not is in probabilistic terms. You're more likely to get this if you do that. We don't teach people probability. The great majority of University of Pennsylvania undergraduates, freshmen, cannot tell me what's the chance of getting 2 heads out of 3 in flipping a coin. And this is not a statement about Penn, it's a statement about American education. We have, and on top of that, in the old days, I suppose when we lived on the savannah, it wasn't very important to know whether you get 2 out of 3 heads on a penny, but it is now. And so basically we have a bunch of routines that got us through our earlier day when we lived in a much less complicated world. One of those routines is the simple, what we call the law of similarity, which is a general feature of not only of humans, but of other animals. If it looks like an X, it's an X. That's an awfully good rule, right? If it looks like a tiger, it's a tiger, right? What else would it be? Get out of here. Well, duck. Okay. But we live in a world of images. The tigers you see are not tigers, they're pictures of tigers, but we're afraid of them. Here's a dog do we made. This is made of fudge. It's a dog do. People know it's made of fudge. Most Penn undergraduates will not take a bite of this, and they like chocolate. They'll take a bite of the same piece of chocolate right next to it that isn't shaped like a dog do. And they say, this is silly, but there's a piece of them in saying, looks like dog do is dog do. That's okay in a world that doesn't have any images. Many people, in this complicated cacophony of nutritional information, it's very easy for people to just decide, this is good for me, that's not good for me. So there's a lot of people who think that salt is bad. You go on a salt-free diet, you're dead in a fairly short period of time. But people think that since they hear that a lot of salt is bad, they shouldn't eat any. This is an attempt to make a simple rule out of something that's a complicated function. A little is good, a lot may not be good. Some people, it doesn't matter if they eat a lot, but some people. So 28% of people in this 3 sets of samples said that a diet totally free of salt is healthier than a diet of the same number of calories that includes a pinch of salt every day. Over 1/4 of people are wrong. They've got it wrong because they tried to oversimplify. Here's another one. A pint of cottage cheese has more calories than 1 teaspoon of ice cream. Of course, that's correct. You'll see that 1/3 of people don't get that one right because they say ice cream, high calories, cottage cheese, low calories, and they forgot to multiply by the amount you eat. And that's a very bad thing because it means that you won't eat ice cream, which is delicious. Just don't eat much. You shouldn't deny yourself ice cream, chocolate, things like that. This is a wonderful book that I recommend to you, Medicine and Culture by Lynn Payer, in which she talks about how different countries, France, Germany, Britain, and the United States, treat medicine and health and food. And for example, in the French-American comparison, she points out that French tend to think that illness comes from within. It's an imbalance of your body organs. And Americans tend to think it comes from without, like it's microbes, it's electric power lines, it's fat, whatever that. So we have a very different view of where the locus of health is. In France, on the national health insurance, you can go to a spa and get paid for because that'll put your balance together again. And we have been able to show in some recent work, which we got random samples of doctors and lay people from 6 countries, including France and the United States, but Germany, Italy, that if we ask people questions about diet and health, like how important are vitamins in health, is meat an important part of a healthy diet, is moderation a basic rule for eating, we found that the doctors agreed more with the lay people in their country on diet and health than they did with the doctors in the next country. French doctors are more like French lay people than they are like German doctors. So that the doctors' actual views of basic health issues are influenced by their culture. Now, one more thing you have to realize, that we don't know a lot about nutrition. I mean, in every field of science, people seem to think that now they've got it. And then you look 20 years down the road and they didn't have it. But people are always convinced that we've got it now. So what happens in nutrition, like other fields, it's not different from other areas of science or social science, is that they go on fads. They go on things that something is thought to be the great public risk substance, and then sometime later it's abandoned. Now you can track this by using a wonderful facility called Google Ngram. Google Ngram is all the books that Google has been able to get a hold of and scan, books and journals. They've done the Michigan and Stanford libraries and other things, and it's got, I think, 400 or 500 billion words, and you can scan it for any word, and you can scan it by year from 1600 to the present. Every 5-year period, how often did that word appear in print? So here's the data, for example, for sucrose, table sugar, and you can see that it peaked around 1975, 1980. This is percent of all words that is sucrose, okay? It's a relative measure. So that measure on the vertical axis is compensated for the number of words in the sample for each year. Sucrose had its day. It was considered to be, that was the big bad one, and it was replaced by cholesterol, as you all know. Now cholesterol is on decline, because people have started to realize that dietary cholesterol doesn't have a whole lot to do with blood cholesterol, which is what's linked to heart disease, and even that link has got some problems. But in any event, so there's cholesterol on the way down, and here you can see, I mistakenly switched from sucrose to sugar, which is why that red curve is going up. It should be sucrose. But you can see cholesterol, and you can see on the bottom, what's rising now? Antioxidants. Now, it's not as common as cholesterol, but here, look, that's the antioxidant curve. That's the same curve you're looking at there, just exaggerated. So, and antioxidants will have their day until they're replaced by the next great risk. Not that they have nothing to do with health, not that cholesterol has nothing to do with health, but the field gets excited. One of my colleagues, David Krzyzewski, is one of the leading people in lipid metabolism in the world, referred to the cholesterol movement as run by the lipid mafia. It's not that it has nothing to do with it, but people get overcommitted to it. In actual fact, what's going on in the world is you've got this complex set of entities which are all interacting to produce the nutrition information you get. You're getting it primarily from the media, but there's all these components. Everyone has a vested interest here, including the government, which has its own, because the government science support is run by scientists, largely, who may be part of the lipid mafia or the antioxidant mafia or whatever is in control. Okay, so we're getting, people don't realize the complexity of the information that they're getting. And in particular, I like to point out that the thing that you might think is the best thing in there, which is medical research, and it probably is the best thing in there, it's got its own problems with fads and all sorts of things too. So we don't really know a lot yet. And furthermore, we don't teach people how science works, so the average person thinks that that's the amount, where's this? Let's see, do I have a pointer here? No? Okay, well, it doesn't matter. Anyway, the left curve is the way people operate. They didn't know anything, and now they hear that somebody published a paper saying that X is bad for you. Okay, it's bad. That's it. And what actually happens is a curve more like on the right. Science fumbles, it stumbles, it gets there. That's why we've gone up from 49 to 79 years, but it's, there's a lot of bumps along the road. Okay. So let's now talk about one particular issue for a moment, which is the obesity epidemic. It is not an epidemic. That is one of those words that is used. George Lakoff here is a specialist on this. It's a word, it's like the Patriot Act or the death tax. You put a word on something and it carries a lot of meaning. It's not an epidemic. Epidemics are contagious. Obesity is not contagious. That's the first thing. If you sit next to someone who's overweight, you're not going to gain weight. Second of all, It doesn't look like an epidemic. Epidemics show a slow rise and then a very high rise. It's like an S-shaped curve, and then it levels off. That's not what obesity looks like. Americans have gained about 1.5 pounds a year for the last 20 years. It's just creeping up slowly. That's not to say it's not important, but it is to say that it doesn't have the epidemic quality that we have to do something immediately or else, it's going to take us over or something. In fact, if you look at the 30 or 40 pounds that Americans have gained in the last 20 years, if you ate less, just 1.5, if you took 1.5 Cokes a week and converted them to Diet Coke and did nothing else, and everything else stayed the same, that's a big assumption, there would be no obesity epidemic at all. That is the amount of calories that you would cut over the year, every year, over 20 years would have gotten rid of the obesity epidemic. So we don't have to completely turn the society all over. We can do some much more modest things like try to cut back a little on what we eat. So now let me quickly, since you read about this, talk a little about one area where we can learn from a culture, and that is France. The French are better at food than we are. I'll just put it simply. And let's see why that's true. First of all, they are much lighter than we are. This is the body mass index greater than or equal to 30. That's the international standard for obesity. I don't want to talk about why it is and what's the problem with it, but that's the standard. And you see the French are about half as much as we are. I am not going to tell you about overweight, but the French are also less overweight than we are. Overweight is greater than or equal to 25. There's very little evidence that being overweight is bad for health. There's quite a bit of evidence that being obese is bad for health. But the people in the obesity mafia who want everything to be stopped in the world so we can study obesity, they want as many people to be upset as possible. So they can get 2/3 of Americans who are overweight or obese, and they like that number, because that's a lot of Americans, or a lot of French for that matter. Okay. We go back to life expectancy. There's France, there's USA. The French eat more fat than we do, and more saturated fat. It doesn't mean it's good for them, but they do, and they are 81, they're 2 years above us in life expectancy. This is complicated because there's a lot of reasons for this. We have to get into all sorts of stuff that I won't get into that might be partly confounded there, but they're certainly not suffering badly for eating that fatty food. And here is the data on cardiovascular disease from the Monica Project, and you can see that the cardiovascular disease in France is considerably lower than in Stanford, USA. French have, there's a lot of different numbers, probably 1/3 less cardiovascular disease. Of course, they die. I mean, only Americans think you don't die. But they do pretty well. So let me just very quickly tell you what we know about how the French differ. So here's one. Would you rather stay in a gourmet hotel for a week or a luxury hotel at the same price? Which would you prefer? And let's just look at the French women. 13% of the French women prefer the luxury hotel. 83% of the Americans do. So the French are both valuing food more, and they're also less worried because a lot of the American women are worried what will happen to their weight if they're locked up in a hotel that has good food for a week. All right. So food is more important in French life. They spend more money on food than we do, by the way. Okay. When you think of heavy cream, do you think of whipped or unhealthy? 28% of the French women think unhealthy, 68% of the Americans. This is a diagnostic of a general issue that French tend to think of food as what they are eating, what's in their mouth, the experience of eating. Americans tend to think of food as what it's doing to them, which of course spoils the eating experience. And the irony is that the French think they're healthier eaters than Americans are, even though they're eating what we call a less healthy diet. So they seem to have their cake and eat it too. Here's an item. Please order the following metaphors describing the relationship between food and the body in order of preference, where 4 is the metaphor you most strongly endorse. A tree, because it is a living thing that draws its nutrients from the soil, sun, and air to grow tall and full. A car, because the car needs fuel for energy, just like the body needs food. A factory, because when we eat food, it is broken down, transformed, distributed, and stored in different parts of the body. It is a very complex process. Or a temple. I won't bother with temple right now, though that's an interesting one. Turns out that the French tend to think it's a tree, and the Americans and the Brits, by the way, tend to think it's a, and the Indians also think it's a tree. And car, the most common attribution from Americans is car or factory. So we're thinking of it as much more mechanical. They're thinking of it as a more natural process. Okay, now let's take a look at the environment, because what you eat is what's in your environment. First of all, French eat much less food with fat removed from it. They don't like low-fat foods. They don't taste as good. That's one reason. This is data from the 1990s or 2000. The French are getting more like Americans. Those of you who are not fond of recent President Bush might think twice, because what's happening to the food and other world is that America's taking over the world. Our genes are taking over the world, our music, our food, our McDonald's. And President Bush slowed that process down slightly because he made our reputation lesser around the world, and so people were less likely to imitate Americans. So he might have helped a little bit in the spreading of this. Okay. Well, French eat less than we do, and the best reason that they eat it, there are a number of reasons, is they're served less. Even in McDonald's in Paris, you get the same 7 items, and it weighs less than in the United States. So the French order the same thing. By the way, they take longer to eat it, and they eat less. And if you go into food stores, the standard size of an individual portion of yogurt or something like that, or Coke, is smaller in France. So you have a Coke in France, you get less calories than you have when you have a Coke here. Now, they just started with smaller cans, so that's going to change a little bit. This is the standard French and American yogurts. Okay. Now, you might say this is the metric system, or something like that. We can always blame things on the metric system. So here we went into the supermarkets, and this was done with 2 Penn undergraduates, Aaron Pete and Kim Kapnick. And we measured other things: toothpaste sizes, toilet paper sizes, cat food size. And in general, the French things weren't smaller on average. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But their food was smaller for humans. Their cat food isn't smaller. And their toilet paper square is bigger, even though they eat less. Okay. Now here's the problem. This is a colleague of mine. This is at Bertillon, the great sorbet place of Paris. And they serve these little sorbet things. They're about the size of a $50. But of course, you could completely undermine the small portions if you eat 2 portions, right? A French peach is smaller than an American peach, but you eat 2 of them, you've got more. And the reason this doesn't happen, this picture notwithstanding, is that people tend to eat one of things. They eat a peach, or one of whatever, one sandwich. And so basically, if you make them smaller, people eat less. We call this unit bias, work I did with Andrew Geyer. And so one of the ideas is, can we implement this idea of smaller portions into America? And the answer is yes and no. It's actually happening in the supermarket right now. But the problem is that if one company does it, other companies will say, hey, look, they're giving you a smaller portion. And people like to get their money's worth. We really need collusion in the food industry for everybody to cut their portion sizes by 1%. That would do an enormous amount, and they could charge the same price. Nobody would notice. And it's too bad we can't do this. We have been able to show, this is work with Sidney Scott, among others, that in a salad bar, this is a 3-deep salad bar, if we put the high-calorie food in the middle so that the people have to reach over to get it, we can cut their food intake on that by 5%. Which is quite a bit if you come there every day. So we can put the high-calorie stuff in the middle, the vegetables and fruits on the outside, just a little change, but a little change, like the 1.5 Cokes, every day over the days will matter. Another thing we found, this was Geyer, Wansink, and I recently, was that if we take a tube of potato chips, have people eat it while they're watching a movie, if we put every 10th chip red, which is another flavor, okay, it's a commercial chip, we can cut their intake of potato chips by half. They're just eating away. You know how you do it, and you say, oh, red one, oh. It's not that they don't like the red one. It's that they stop. We stop this process. Okay. Now, I want to take on the biggest problem that you're going to hate me for, natural bias. People love natural. I've been in Berkeley and Oakland today. I've seen so much organic stuff at such high prices. I can't believe it. And the question is, what's that about? Well, this is nature on the left. That's nature on the right. There's a lot of stuff going on in nature. Death is natural. That's the big one. It is natural. Intervention by humans in the world has done a lot of things, including getting more food for poor people in the world. This is just corn yield per acre, and this is due to, of course, a lot of the genetics breeding and then modern stuff, stuff that a lot of us don't like, but it's getting more corn in there in the field for people who just don't have enough calories. Here's a map of natural disasters. For 1 week, this is a random selection. I didn't pick this. These are all the natural disasters that occurred in 1 week. Landslides, tornadoes, all kinds of stuff. That's all natural stuff. Where did we get this idea that natural is so great? Nature isn't good. Nature isn't bad. Nature just is. It's just there. You know, lions eat zebras. Do you like that? No, they're cute. The zebras are cute, but you know, that's the way it goes. We asked people in 6 countries, free associate to the word natural. What comes to mind? Almost every word is positive. Beautiful, healthy, all this stuff. Nobody's thinking of tornadoes and death and malaria. If you ask people, Americans almost all will say they prefer natural things to unnatural things for food, not as much for medicines, by the way. If you ask them why, they give some story or other, like it's healthier, and then so what we say then at that point is, okay, suppose we had a natural and a processed food, and they were exactly the same chemically, exactly the same. Would you still like the natural food better? And almost everybody says yes. Now there's no difference between them, but it's like natural is like God. You don't argue with people who believe in God if you don't, or vice versa. You just say, that's the way we are. Well, that's the way natural is. You can't convince people that natural isn't a good idea. You have here on this campus the world's leading expert on pesticides, Bruce Ames, a distinguished biochemist, who has shown quite persuasively that that pesticide risks are relatively low compared to other things that are health issues in our culture, other chemical things, and in particular the health carcinogen load from natural carcinogens. Plants make chemicals to protect themselves from insects and microorganisms. Some of those chemicals are carcinogens, and the load that we have in our diet from those is higher than the load from sprayed carcinogens. Not that it's good to spray carcinogens, but if you spray carcinogens and the plant doesn't get injured, the plant won't build. When a plant gets injured, it makes more carcinogens. So it's a question in any particular case whether natural or synthetic pesticides are more dangerous in a particular case. There's not a rule of thumb here. Now, we are full of contradictions. Here are the 7 most deadly chemical compounds. 5 of them are natural, including botulism toxin, number 1. So where did we come off with this idea? I love nature. I live on a couple of acres. I love it. I love birds. There's some wonderful things about nature. But I think that's the good piece. But there's a bad piece too. So we ask people, how natural is something? Scale is 100, meaning as natural as anything. 0 is completely unnatural. And so we say we start with a wolf. That's very natural. People call it near 100. How much is it reduced? How much natural is a German Shepherd? Bred dog, 12% down. How about a Cocker Spaniel? 15% down. A Cocker Spaniel doesn't look anything like a wolf. It is a completely different animal. It's hard to even believe it's the same animal, right? And if we ask them, how about a wild animal with 1 gene inserted to change its hair thickness? Look at that. It's way down. That's much more like a wolf than a Cocker Spaniel. Is a crazy animal. Doesn't exist. It probably couldn't live more than an hour out in the woods. Here are my dogs. I love them. This is not natural. I'm not worried about there not being natural, but some people are. If we ask people, this is data from 6 countries. We say, how natural? This is a scale of 0 to 10. 10 is as natural as possible. Milk with natural vitamin D supplement. Okay, and that's rated as 5.35 natural. Now we say milk with all fat removed, skim milk. That's rated as more natural than milk with a little bit of natural vitamin D in it. And that's because we don't count subtractives. Something is natural. If you take something out, it's okay. I mean, skim milk is a complete artificial oxymoron. It isn't possible. You couldn't live on it. Babies wouldn't be able to live on it. And yet people will think, that's okay. You take out half the calories of milk, bang, that's no problem. Okay. If we ask people to define natural, they write out a definition. Here's some data from the 150 people from each country, those 3 countries. You see, they often say adding something makes it unnatural. In fact, that's one of the major definitions of natural is additives. Nobody says subtractives. We don't even have a word for it, by the way. But even if you could say something was taken out. So this is what we call additivity dominance. It's a little strange. And finally, just one fine example, we say to people, how natural is spring water with no minerals, which comes out of a spring? 92 natural on a scale of 0 to 1. Now we add 0.1% minerals from another spring water, natural. It drops to 69. Now we remove the same minerals. Okay, now we're back where we started. It's less natural. Why? Because you poked in twice. And poking in there is what the problem is. It's not what the content is. It's that you are doing God's work by poking in and fussing around in there. Okay. Turns out that we have something now called organic overkill. People who think organic foods are good think everything about them is good, that they're healthier, that they taste better, that they're better for the environment. They are probably better for the environment, by the way. They are not much healthier, if at all, as you may have noticed from the New York Times recently. They don't taste better. They don't taste about the same, according to the one good study that's been done. They lead to a healthier outward appearance. Some people say that. We're showing that they were paying attention because they did say that only 3% that said that organic foods are less expensive. We see the same thing with natural. We think they're going to think that natural foods are lower in calories, and any good property is going to be agglomerated to organic and natural, even if it's not there. And this is a way of thought, and these things correlate with each other, that people who think organic foods are healthier are the same ones who think that it's better for the environment, the same ones who think it tastes better, and so on. I won't bother you with that. Now, I want to turn to two other questions quickly. Well, okay, one more. Water. I should have said this, and I'm sorry, this was a natural clicker. What is the most important nutrient? By far, water. There's nothing close. 60% of your body is water. 75% of your brain is water. So if you say someone has water on the brain, that doesn't mean anything. And something has happened. It used to be free, and now we're selling it. This is an extraordinary, this has gone up and up and up. And by the way, it just turned. In 2010, it didn't increase the sales of bottled water. This is good news, because what we're doing is putting all these plastic bottles out there, selling something which is no better than tap water, and selling it at a price higher than gasoline. It's crazy. I don't understand how this happened. We didn't used to do this, by the way, those of you too young. The Europeans have been drinking bottled water for a long time, but we didn't until 10, 15 years ago, or 20 years ago. Okay. So what we do is we get a hold of it, and now we have Maison de l'Eau, and you have all these places. I'd say, like here you have a label, 1997 first winter runoff. This is the way people are going to start marketing water. Here's one, not from concentrate. Or another one, not a spring water, no cholesterol, no fat. In fact, you can get a bottle with nothing in it. It says, just add water. I mean, we are crazy. Okay. Now, water is a short resource. You know this because you live in California. It's more so in Southern California, but it's true. The world has a real water shortage, and there is a solution to this problem. Well, there are a couple of solutions, but one solution is to recycle water and to take the water from a sewage system, and instead of dumping it in the ocean and then just imagining that it goes away, of course it doesn't go away, it evaporates and comes right back down the stream, but it seems distant enough to just take it right into the water plant, as they do in a few places in the United States now, process it directly. We have very good processing equipment, and you can pass it through a filter which only passes molecules as the size of water or smaller. So you get pure water, perfectly good water, but people are offended by it. They're disgusted by it. People think of water that's coming from something like this, not something like this. Okay? But it's all coming from urine. It's just a question of how many steps it went through before that. Just to give you a sense of this, I had a friend of mine calculate for me, a geologist. It turns out that if you take a drink of water in Europe now, you are going to drink at least a few molecules of water that went through the body of Adolf Hitler. Now, it takes 2,000 years for water to equilibrate, so you can probably get away without that right now in the United States. But in a few thousand years, we get Moses water, though, right now. That's equilibrated. So basically, all the water is sewer water, and the problem is that the people who are opposing this their watchword is toilet to tap. And that really is very dramatic. It makes you think of toilets flushing and then you're drinking the water. And there's been a tremendous amount of public opposition to this extremely ecologically and economically feasible way of dealing with a water problem. And what are we going to do about that? Well, here we have something to learn from another culture. And the culture we have to learn from now is Singapore. Singapore has water shortages. They are introducing recycled water. Singapore is an unusual country because it's a semi-democratic country, but everyone's pretty confident they'll be re-elected, so they don't have to worry about pleasing the electorate too much. And they have only one level of government. Can you imagine one level of government? All you have to do is convince the water minister, who I met with, of Singapore, that something's a good idea, and it's done. You don't have to go through the local government, state government. You don't have protest groups. You don't have lawyers. So Singapore, because it is a more stable country than let's elect our representatives every 2 years, democracy, is able to make forward-looking decisions. And we might want to learn from that about the layers of government, about some kinds of the blocks. They only have 4 million people and we have 300. There's a lot of problems here. Okay. I want to touch on one other topic and then my final one. My next topic is just one other way to deal with the food problems, and that's eating insects. There is a Nordic food lab in Copenhagen which is devoted, among other things, to getting insects into the diet because insects are a great source of food. They are nutritious, high in protein, very nutritious. They have a very good conversion ratio, unlike the conversion ratio for cows, where you need an awful lot of calories of plants to make a pound, something between 5 and 10 calories worth of digestive vegetable to make 1 pound of calories. It's almost 1-to-1 with insects. It's very close. So they're much more efficient. You don't have to grow food for them. They always find food. And they are easy to farm. The only thing is we have to get people to eat them. And that's the problem. It's like the recycled water. They're disgusted by it. One obvious solution is to make insect flour. That is to say, instead of making people eating insects, just grind them up into something that's a powder and put it a little bit on first and a little bit more. And there are ways of doing this, and I'm hoping that we do that. This is the inside of the Nordic Food Lab. Here's a box of insects being sold in grasshoppers being sold in Scandinavia. Okay, so now I want to close with, and I have to now pick up this and say, okay, so here's the food of the Western world, and here's what Adria said when he was talking at this meeting, the chef of El Bulli. He said, well, first of all, a lot of people eat at home. That's great, but he said, I don't know anything about what they do at home. I mean, nobody knows what they do, so let's get rid of that. He said, okay. Then there are people who eat out. He said, we're talking about the Western world, and he said, well, and of course, a lot of them eat fast food. And that's good. He doesn't, but we don't care about that, we chefs, right? So we get rid of those. He says, and then he said, of course, there are restaurants that are sort of family, nice restaurants, but they're okay. But, right, let's get rid of those. He says, and then he says that there are restaurants that claim to be good, and most of them aren't very good, he says. So that takes care of them. And he takes this little last one, he says, this is us at the end of this whole thing. And I want to talk about us for a minute because there's a revolution occurring in upscale cuisine that it's going to affect all of us. So I went to this meeting of the great chefs, and it starts out outdoors, first day, and there are all those tables. In each of those tables, a chef goes, one of the great chefs of the world, picks from a bunch of local food, Danish food. It's very hard to cook good food in Denmark. It's a lousy climate. I mean, they don't have a lot of stuff. But they did it. A guy pulled up with herbs that he foraged, an expert, brings his truck up, empties out all the herbs, and the chefs are sniffing them and taking them. Each chef takes a table and makes something. They had fish, they had a side of beef, they had all sorts of stuff. And here is one of those tables, and that's Ferran Adria on the left, cooking, picking some herbs there, and he's going to go to one of those tables and cook them. And this went on for 4 hours, and then we all ate what they cooked. It wasn't a competition. Everyone sat down, and we had a great meal. Then we go to the meeting the next day. It's in a circus tent with dirt floor, and So the chefs, this is some of the chefs making a presentation. There was a nice video so you could watch what they were making, passing food out to everybody, all 500 people. It was a wonderful experience. Now, I had to give a paper at that meeting, and I want to just tell you briefly to end what I said to them, because I said, what can I tell these chefs? So the first thing I said to them was, you know, you want to give people a great experience at your restaurant, right? Right. Do you want to give them a great experience or a great memory? And they said, what? I said, well, it's different, because some things that you would do to give people a great experience are not going to be remembered. And other things that they might not notice are going to be important for the memory. We know this from a lot of recent work, a lot of it by Daniel Kahneman, Barbara Fredrickson, and others. So we asked, for example, just take this. Think of a positive experience like going to a favorite sports event or concert or a meal. We can talk about three aspects: the anticipation, the experience, and the memories. What's more important for you of those three things? And you see people disagree, never mind what the numbers are. Some people say the experience is most important, some people say the memories, some people say the anticipation. But that makes a difference. And the reason it makes a difference, let's consider now this question we've asked. When I go to my favorite restaurant, I choose to order my favorite item on the menu or a new item that I have never tried. How many of you would say your favorite item? One, that's A. How many of you would say B, a new item that I've never tried? Okay, so if you, from a point of view of anticipated pleasure, you should order your favorite item because you're going to be looking forward to it. You know it's great. You know it's going to taste good. No uncertainty. Great. The other one, who knows? It might not be so good, even though it's a good restaurant. If we look at your experience, again, you should go for the favorite food because you know it's going to be positive. You're going to have a great experience eating it. The other one, probably, but you're not sure. But if you're looking at memories, you want to order the new one because if you order the lobster cantonese for the 20th time at your favorite Chinese restaurant, you won't remember it. It's going to be like the first 19. And there's no new memory. So if you're trying to create memories, you want to try new things. If you want to just look forward to things and have the maximum experience, you want to try old winners. Okay. Now, something's happened to the Western meal, and this is what these chefs are doing. It used to be the standard French meal: appetizer, main course, and dessert. And it's been changed now to a multiple course, multiple appetizer meal of 10 to 15, up to 30 or so courses. You used to choose what appetizer, main course, and dessert. Now in the upscale restaurants, you don't choose anything. You sit down and the food comes. Boom, boom, boom. I asked people what's their favorite course, and most of them, this is an American internet sample, I haven't got the French data yet, said main course. I asked the chefs at this meeting, by show of hands, what was your favorite course? Appetizer one, it was like 80% appetizer. Okay, so what they're doing is making more appetizers. Even when you eat a meal like a three-course, a meal with meat, potatoes, and vegetable, people eat them in different ways. So they construct their own little meal. Some people eat their favorite item first, some their favorite last, some rotate, do all sorts of things. Okay, now let's just think of a concert from it. This is the old form of a concert: overture, symphony, Symphony 1, Symphony 2, that would be a typical classical concert. That's just like the French meal, except for one thing: you don't get to choose. You go there and you're going to hear Mozart. And you don't say, I'd rather not, or I'm allergic to Mozart, or I'm gluten insensitive, I can't hear Mozart. Or you don't say, play it faster, please. You don't do anything. You go there and sit. And that's what you do at the new restaurants. You go there and you sit and they give you food. And that's what's happening, of course, with the modern album, because now you don't have this concert anymore. You can just listen to 10 or 15 numbers in pop music, or now you don't even have to do that. You can just pull each one out digitally. So here's a typical concert, classical concert. You have an overture, you have a Mozart symphony, and then you have an intermission, and then you have a second set of pieces, like maybe Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Both of these symphonies, like the typical classical symphony, end in a coda. They end in something exciting. Okay? Now that's important. But because the work of Kahneman, Fredrickson, and others says that this is about negative experiences. They study pain. But if pain ends sharply, you have a much more negative memory of it than if it ends gradually. Even if the gradual end, as in the second line, takes longer, you have more pain. The second curve up there has more area under the pain curve. Okay, this is time going left to right, amount of pain is up. So the idea is that sharp endings are bad if they're negative, and they're probably good if they're positive, but there's very very little data on that. They also have another phenomenon that they've reported, duration neglect. 1 minute of pain and 2 minutes of pain. 2 minutes of pain is twice as bad as 1 minute's pain when you have it. But in memory, they're the same. People say, oh, but I felt pain. That's all they remember. They don't remember. We don't record how long we felt pain. Okay, just think of going to, a really interesting example is you go to your favorite baseball team. They're playing terribly. They're losing 2-0. It's a terrible game. They score 3 runs in the 9th inning. They win 3-2. And people say, how was the game? You say, it was a great game. You were in pain for 8 innings. And you had one thing at the end there. It lasted a few minutes. It's crazy. Okay. We have been able to show, Elizabeth Rode and Paul Durlock and I, that if we give people a real meal in a Chinese restaurant, 5 dishes, and we already know what dishes they like. If we double the size of the last dish, that's their favorite dish at the end of the meal, they don't like the meal any better at all than if we just give them half as much. In other words, when they think about how good the meal was, they just remember, I had this particular dish that I like. They don't remember, they don't multiply it. That means if you want to have something really expensive in a meal and have a good memory, you don't need a bite or two. Just pay attention when you take the bite or two. Okay. So now I'm going to take you through 2 meals to end this. And the first meal is the meal in Copenhagen at the restaurant that sponsored the meeting, Noma. It is now the #1 ranked restaurant in the world. An extraordinary thing because it only uses local food, which is a very difficult thing to do. And I just want to take you through a few of the dishes. René Redzepi is the chef who studied with Ferran Adria. Here's just a scene in the restaurant. It holds about 50 people, 1 sitting a night. These are live shrimp. Live shrimp popping off the thing, and you put one in your mouth and eat it. Whew. Live ants. They're promoting insects here. Live ants crawling around in that. You just take them up and eat them. They were pretty good. Some people don't eat them. Those 2 dishes were good, but this one is much better. But it's not as memorable. This is crab meat and an incredible preparation of egg yolk that was just an incredible texture. Here's a dish that we made at the table. They actually come to the table. There's a little clock there. You see it on the left. You're given a recipe, and you say, for 2 minutes, you put this in. You put the egg, the duck egg. You break the duck egg. You put it in. Then you add this. Then you add that. You're making the dish for yourself right at the table. Here's the dish at the end. Nice dish. All kinds of 27 courses. 27 courses. Interesting. Now, let me just say, first of all, 3 desserts at the end. The dessert was at the end of the meal. 3 desserts at the end of the meal of the 27 courses. Now we go to the world's greatest restaurant, the master chef, El Bulli, Ferran Adria's restaurant. Meal starts outside. This is the group of us eating there, 5 of us. The one next to me on the right is my son, Lex, who's involved in this research with me now. He's a music theorist and a molecular gastronomer. First course, lime juice, okay, and rum poured into liquid nitrogen at your table. Smoking up there, what an experience. It comes out, it's stuffed into that little lime. It's the most wonderful daiquiri you've ever had. It's completely smooth because when you crystallize something immediately with the cold of nitrogen, it's really smooth. Another dish. Cute dish. This is actually not caviar. It's a joke. It's made of cantaloupe that is dropped into an agar solution, and a little membrane forms around each drop of cantaloupe. So it's just like caviar in texture, but it tastes like cantaloupe. This is a remarkable dish. This was a 34-course meal. Took 6 hours, and it was the best meal I've ever had. This is pine nut extract in that little glass. It's hot, steaming hot, and it's served in a glass that's coated in ice, so when you drink it, it's cold. You have never had anything in your life that was aromatic and cold, because cold suppresses vapor. So cold things don't smell much. He's figured out how to get the coldness and the smell at the same time. And it's really an experience. Here's some sushi. that little can there. There's my son. You spray your mouth with ginger first, and then you eat the sushi. Normally, you'd get the sushi and then the ginger. He's inverted the order. But the thing is, it's just not that he's playing like an artist because he's a great artist. People try to imitate him, and sometimes it's just flashy but not great. His stuff is great. Okay, so I want to end with, my son was inspired by that. He's actually eaten at El Bulli twice, and he does menus, and he's a music theorist. So he's applying some ideas about music because concerts are like meals now, right? You sit there and you get the food. So here's a meal where you start with, you have symmetry. Symmetry is very important in music. It isn't at all important in meals. You start with a rose petal sorbet and you end with a plum clove float. So you have a sort of a nice arrangement there. There's a bunch of stuff in the middle. Theme and variation is important in music. They don't do that with cuisine. So he has heirloom tomatoes served 5 ways. Here it is. 5 different ways and you eat them in a particular order. It gets less and the tomato becomes more and more distant. In other words, the last thing up at the top is a gazpacho. And so what happens is that you're seeing tomato transformed as you eat it, which is characteristic of music. The way music is, it takes a theme and changes it. And here's the dessert, which is the same thing. It's a peach, and it ends up with a peach gazpacho. So this raises some important questions that I just want to close with. And that is, first of all, what makes a meal, the memory of a meal, great? We don't know. It's interesting. To me, the most striking thing of that meal at Noma was the ants. It wasn't the best dish, but it's the one I remember best. So my memory for dishes does not really predict how much I like the meal. That's sort of interesting, and we don't understand how that works. Here is the typical meal. That, of course, most people like the main course best. Looks like that black curve. That is, it gets better and better. As you go through a sequence of 10 items, it gets better and better and then worse and worse. But the ideal meal, from everything we know about memory and liking, would be a meal that starts with a bang and ends with a bang. But we don't do that. And I said to the chefs, why don't you do that? And they said, well. It would be even better probably to do a sawtooth like this so you get a little more contrast. The interesting thing is that we end meals with desserts, Western meals. Dessert is not the favorite course. What you should do is give people a 15-course meal, give them 14 dishes, and say, okay, for the 15th, you get any one of the first 14 that you like best. Because we want to end with a bang. Because music ends with a bang, it's good. Things are remembered better when they end with a bang, and things are liked more. So we have all of that to think. So at the end of this meeting, there I am with Ferran Adria, one of the great moments of my life after I gave this talk, which was long. Ferran Adria comes out of the audience, goes like this, and hugs me. Now, he's my hero. How many of you have ever been hugged by your hero in public? I mean, it was amazing. Okay, so I want to end with, maybe we shouldn't end meals with dessert. And I want to say, in defense of food, of course, one of Michael Pollan's great books, eating can be bad for health, but not eating is even worse for your health. Thank you. And there's grapes for all here. Asian red ones or American grapes?
Oh, yeah, bring them over.
I think they're organic, but I'm not sure. They were bought in Berkeley, so they're almost certainly organic.
Yeah. Oh, I'm going to need a microphone. Hold on, have a seat.
I hope I irritated all of you a little bit at least.
Well, thank you. That was both a great experience and, I think, a great memory.
Sometimes you get both.
Okay, I want to hear from you guys. So I've got some questions from your reading responses, and I'll look through those as we're talking. But we have about 20 minutes. And who's got a question? Starting with students. Yes. Will you stand up and speak as loud as you can?
First of all,
you tasted that peach today.
I tasted it. You do sell it? Yes, we do. Okay, good. So there's no problem how you're going to sell it. People are willing, In the market we were at in Oakland or Berkeley today, it was $4.90 for organic peaches and I think $2 something for regular peaches. I don't know that the organic peach tastes better. I didn't try. But in this community, people are willing to pay because they feel better. They feel that this is better for the earth. Maybe it is better for the earth. They feel it's healthier, and they're willing to pay for the extra because they have money to spare. You won't do that in the inner city because people can't afford to buy organic food in the inner city. But in a place like Berkeley, you can sell it. As long as people are willing to pay for it, they may feel better, first of all, when they eat organic food. Oh, how do you sell it to students? It depends how much money they have and how committed they are to the organic movement. I mean, people will pay, people give money to charity. They lose it, right? They give it away. If you feel that you're helping the world, that's one way. Another way is you feel it's actually a better product, which it may be. I'm not saying it isn't. I'm just saying it's not obviously a better product. I mean, there's only one study ever done that I know of by Howard Schutz at Davis, UCal Davis, where he grew the same foods, vegetables, organically and not organically on the same patch of land, and he did taste tests and they came out about the same. That's just taste. That's not the kindness to the earth. All right, he didn't measure healthiness, but I don't think it probably matters. Okay, but anyway, the answer is that people do buy organic things. Whole Foods does very well.
Thank you. Yes.
How does which food movement?
Molecular.
Oh, molecular. Oh, well, sorry. Yeah, sure. That's a perfectly good question, and my answer is probably not at all. What this movement is doing, remember I started out apologizing for the fact that I was only talking about the Western world, and then I apologized at the end with that little grape for only talking about a little piece of the West. This is the ultimate in culinary experience. It's an attempt to expand our culinary horizons. It eventually will trickle down, if you'll pardon that political term, will trickle down into more commonly consumed foods, just like an Oreo cracker has, you know, sort of a crisp outside and a sort of soft inside. I mean, that kind of thing, you know, trickles down into normal daily snack food. But this is about something else. Just like Mozart isn't going to make the world a healthier place either, but I wouldn't want to lose him. So the answer is that this is a little piece of the world, but it's growing. It's going to please more and more people, but still a very small percentage of humanity. This is not about this course. I ended with it. Most of my lecture was about this course, but that little piece isn't.
But I also think we are seeing that chefs have an influence, and even if none of us can ever eat at that restaurant, in fact, it's closed. Well, Noma's not closed, but
El Bulli's closed.
The chefs are cultural figures that change people's tastes. And if you go back to the 70s and you look at what Alice Waters did in Berkeley in terms of sensitizing people to issues of quality over quantity and organic food and paying attention to how the food is grown, those were very elite ideas to start, and they did spread. And in fact, Alice Waters is the reason that you can sell a peach for $4.90 a pound. She really started that.
By the way, Noma, relevant to what you said, Noma works with local food. So one of the signposts of modern progressive thinking about food is local food, and that's why we had a lot of seaweed at that meal, and it was very good. But I'm just saying because that was what was available. So Red Zeppi is showing how you can be creative with even limited local food.
And what does he charge for a meal there?
I didn't pay. I'm guessing $250. But I'm not sure. It could be somewhere between $180 and $300.
Okay, another question from a student? Oh, there's one. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any data or insight that can see like how many people enjoy eating versus just eat to survive? Because depending on what you do, it kind of changes what you eat to and what how you feel about it. Chefs are great because you enjoy eating, but if you don't care.
There are people, a small percentage of people who don't much care about food. It's a small percent of people who just say, I eat because I have to. There are a lot of people who would say, I think it's about a quarter of our American sample says they would, if they could take a pill and get all their nutrition without having to do anything cheap, would they do it? And some, I don't know, I forget, some 20, 30% say yes. Mostly women, and it's mostly saying it not because they don't like food, but because they don't want the stress of weight, worrying, and eating. In general, we find that French people, we have asked people to describe themselves as eaters. French use the word joy and social exchange much more than Americans, and Americans tend to use words like healthy much more. But many Americans who are very stressed about the healthfulness of food love food. And that makes it, in a way, harder for them because they don't seem to get that they can eat a small piece of delicious chocolate, and that's fine. Just don't eat a big piece. Eat it slower, and you'll get as much chocolate experience in your mouth as if you gobble it down fast, but more of it.
It's a very important distinction that Paul's introducing. It's something to think about in your own eating. Are you looking for experience when you sit down to eat, or are you looking for quantity of food? And I think most of us would say we're looking for experience, but food's marketed to us usually on the basis of quantity, and we've come to think of it that way. There's a related question from a student on her reading response related to stress. You discuss worrying about a meal versus enjoying a meal as a difference between American and French eaters. Do you think this difference in behavior affects how the body processes a given meal? Do these attitudes have any kind of biological effect?
I don't know the answer to that question. Generally speaking, most people think that stress is not healthy. And there's some evidence for that. And so if you're stressing about eating, I'm assuming that's probably going to be less healthy for you, whether it affects the way the food is absorbed or simply your corticosteroids or something, I don't know. It's a possibility. I don't know the answer to that. But I mean, for example, is your digestion different? I don't know.
It's an honest answer. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, my name is Ariel. I'm actually a pet rat.
Go for it. You can see how articulate she is already, right?
I was wondering if you're anyone who you know has done studies where you're actually hooking some sort of receptors up to the brain to see what's happening when people are eating food as opposed to just asking them.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine there would be a divide there.
What do you mean by divide?
I mean, it's the discrepancy between what's actually happening, what sort of things are going on in the brain while people are eating food, and maybe what they say they think about certain foods.
Okay, first there are a number of things in your question. First of all, it'd be very difficult to do that because if you're in a scanner, you don't want to be chewing. But you could be, I guess, taking something through a straw or something. But so far, we don't know enough about how the brain, what the interpretation of brain signals to be able to say from them what you're actually experiencing. That is, the way we would check that a brain signal meant, for example, this tastes sweet, is by asking you. And so our reference point is always dealing directly with you. So eventually we may know enough more about how to interpret brain signals that we can actually say, you're saying this, but we think that you're experiencing that. But we can't do that yet because we just don't know enough about the brain.
Paul, this is another question from a student. I'll get to yours in a second. Talking about the cultural differences between the French and the Americans, can we do anything with that? In other words, is that so embedded in our culture, or can we actually learn things from the French?
Well, we can certainly learn to eat less because the simplest way to eat less is to serve less. And that's easy. Now, we don't know. No one has done the critical experiment. A number of people, Barbara Rolls, David Levitsky, a number of other people, myself, have shown that if we cut down portion size, people will eat less and be perfectly happy. We know that. Barbara Rolls and David Levitsky have shown that in the next few meals, they don't compensate for that. If they eat less in one meal, they don't eat more. But we don't know if we do that for a year or 6 months, will people actually lose weight. Nobody has done that study. We've tried to set up to do it, but it involves getting a lot of cooperation from vendors, from people who provide. We were going to try to do it in university dining facilities where freshmen eat all 3 of their meals, and we had to line up an awful lot of people to go along with this, and we couldn't do it. So we don't know whether we can import smaller portion size over the long run, but it couldn't hurt to try to cut portion sizes down, and we are. Even the food industry is doing this because they're scared of being blamed for obesity. Other things we can do, I guess we could get people to pay more attention to what they're eating. I mean, so many people are talking about the Dallas Cowboys while they're shoveling food in their mouth. The French tend not to do that. They tend to attend to the food. Can we get people to do a little more of that? Maybe we can. The French don't snack much. We could certainly curb that a little bit. First of all, it's considered polite in our culture. If someone comes over at 3 o'clock, you're supposed to feed them. You know, that doesn't have to be the case. We could do, there's a number of little things we could do, and there are plenty of Americans who are like the French, and there are plenty of French who are like Americans. So it's a question of redistributing the percentage of people who are behaving in these different ways. So I think we can do it, and I think there are books, the Omnivore's Dilemmas, all the books, the books about French and Americans, books that make people pay more attention to food, be more involved with them. None of them do the job. You have to keep hitting them. I was telling Michael that 5 years ago, or 4 years ago, the Omnivore's Dilemma was read by every freshman at Penn. Every freshman reads a book at Penn. They sent the book over the summer, they read the book, they hear a lecture from the author or someone else, in this case it was me, about the book, and then all 2,000 of them go into a little section where they meet with a faculty member and talk about the book. I was able to show, because I teach intro psych, that after reading that book, people were more thoughtful about food, they were more concerned about where food comes from, they were more worried about the food industrial complex, but I got them a year later and they were back where they started. But that's because, that doesn't mean the book didn't have an effect. They should have read another Omnivore's Dilemma the next year, or another book like this. You don't teach people things by telling them at once. You keep banging on the same thing. That's what parents are doing. They say, I told you not to eat with your hands. They didn't say that once. They said it 100 times. Didn't work with me, but anyway.
Okay, we had a question over there. Yes, with the red headband.
There is some research on eating disorders in different countries. Up until very recently, there were none in India. I know that. Now, India is a big country, so it's 1.1 billion people. We have recent data from India which suggests that Indian women are worrying a lot about their weight now. We don't have any data on eating disorders, but we have data from 20 years ago from Indian college students, and Indian women thought they were just fine at their current weight. They don't think that anymore. So that's worrisome. So my guess is, just as the whole world is becoming more American in so many other ways, this eating disorder thing is going, and obesity, are both being exported because we make, our thin ideal is apparently quite appealing around the world, and our fast food is very appealing around the world, and people love McDonald's, even in France, much to the French distress. So it looks like it's going to rise in the rest of the world, but not yet.
All right, I'm going to get the last question. You'll have an opportunity to talk further with Paul. He's doing a Google Hangout on October 1st at, hold on one second, at 2 p.m. Pacific time. So please check that out, and you can ask him more questions then. But my question is, you didn't really say, how are the ants?
Oh, well, it's a funny thing to say this, but I don't remember. I mean, it was a dish. The ants are in the dish. They were running around on top, but mostly it was the sauce. I did eat fermented grasshopper juice at the Nordic lab, and I did eat some bee larvae, and they were pretty good. I've had a fair number of grasshoppers. Grasshoppers are good. They're crunchy. I like them. You don't have to make flour, from my point of view. Lots of people around the world eat insects, by the way. Lots of cultures eat insects. So I'm embarrassed that I don't remember what.
But it is. But it was memorable. But it's just you didn't remember what it was like.
That's the amazing thing. It was memorable that I ate it, and I don't remember what it tasted like.
It's the story. All right. Well, please join me in thanking Paul Rozin.